Hello and welcome everybody to another live show of the BEARSKIFILM show. And today we're joined by one of our favorite guests that came on with us last year, Lauren Cox from Locked On Bears. Lauren, man, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. And yeah, it's been a fun season so far.
Definitely. And yeah, for anybody out there who has not checked out Locked On Bears, I highly suggested. Really, really good content, consistent content. And man, you do a great job. I can't say enough good things about you. So
Appreciate that.
uh,
Thanks.
yeah. And Dave, how you doing tonight?
Good, man. We were just talking pre-show. Like, I think the bye week was a kind of nice little mental chill break. Kind of lets you reset and refocus on. I mean, maybe that's a wrong way to say it. Like, take a step back in the league. You kind of focus on the bigger picture of the league rather than just watching Bears games. Because whenever there's a Bears game on, I think you kind of revolve your weekend around it, and then everything is just compared to them. But when there's a week without your team on, you kind of, at least I feel like I see the bigger picture a little better. And maybe like when Paulie went on vacation, I feel like, I got to take a step back, man, and just realize football's not that serious, man. That's how Paulie was talking about.
Just because I went to Amsterdam doesn't mean I instantly became a hippie, No.
I was like mad at Paulie. I'm like, we're still in the trenches over here, man.
I'm just like, no, we're fucked. We're long term. We're done. It doesn't matter now. But speaking of the bye week, one of the questions I asked David throughout the week on our phone conversations was, do you think it came at a good time? So I just want to shoot that your way, Lauren. Do you think this bye week came at a good time for this team?
I mean, I don't know if it's a bad time, but there are certainly better times to be at. I mean, I would have liked to see it a little bit later in the process, maybe right before you get into all those divisional games. But I certainly understand, like, you want it after a London trip just to sort of reset and connect that way. But I just would have liked the London trip and the bye week to be a little bit later on. But I don't think it's going to have a drastic impact either way on the success of the Bears this season. So they're just going to take it and roll with it.
Yeah. So
I would have said, sorry, Paulie, to just comment on the bye week because we were talking about it. Maybe we just put it on the show. Yeah, for sure. Good timing health wise, because one of my friends was talking about how Ryan Bates needs to come back sooner than later, and I'm like, absolutely not. Like, earliest he should come back is the bye week. Brisker coming back. Probably a good sign for the defense. And then Kyler Gordon, I don't think we ever, at least I never really noticed or heard anything serious or concrete about his injury. So probably that, in that sense, it's good timing. And then this is more of a question for Lauren, and I should have done the research on this, but have we put into consideration, like, what is Matt Eberfluh and this coaching staff's record after a bye week? And do they perform well with extra time, or are they a team that, because are some of those coaches in the NFL that, just notoriously do bad. Maybe they overthink or outthink themselves during bye weeks rather than doing well. So I don't know. How do you guys feel about that for the Bears? I don't know how to plan for my expectations for Washington.
Yeah, they're 1-1 in the 2 bye weeks Matt Eberflus has had. Last year they beat the Lions coming out of the bye week, and maybe their best game of the year, at least the best feeling win of the year, where it felt like they really shut down what Ben Johnson wanted to do offensively. The Bears came out pretty hot offensively. They held Goff under 200 yards and picked him off a couple times, and it just felt like a good all-around game. And then the year before, the bye week was right before they played the Eagles, and they lost that game, but it was a really good Eagles team, and it felt like the Bears played them surprisingly close through most of that game. It was a 2-score game by the fourth quarter, but it was tight enough in there where you felt like the Bears didn't belong anywhere near that Eagles team, and they were still able to at least hang in there. So I come in with some level of confidence that the Bears do take decent advantage of this advanced week. And I mean, if Jaden Daniels is going to be out, maybe it won't make a difference either way. But at least you can feel a couple of different ways you can be confident this week.
Cool, good to know, because I was considering that as like a Matt Eberflus schematic thing issue wise. The only other famous bye week was the mini bye, right? Like 2 years ago with Justin Fields, and extra time, I guess, does serve this coaching staff well. So I was just kind of curious timing wise. I guess this is a good matchup to have an extra bye week. This is a pretty big deal, honestly, in the grand scheme of playoff pictures. I can't believe we're even talking about that this early, but you beat the Commanders. It's a pretty necessary, very important win. You maintain your 7th spot in the standings right now because you are the 7th seed and in the playoff. If the playoffs started today, which is always a funny thing to say, but I guess it is like a big game. So in that sense.
And it is worth noting, different offensive and defensive coordinator than the last 2 bye weeks. So you never know that if that's purely an Eberfluh thing that'll carry over, or if we'll see how Waldron and Eric Washington do that the same or differently than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I was going to say you have to use that term staff very loosely, right? So, one of the things from this bye week that I took away was actually just watching some of the other teams. Like if you caught the Vikings and Detroit game, man, was that a fight to the end. And then just watching the Chiefs again and just being reminded of how good they are and looking at our division. And that's the title of the show tonight. The NFC North is tough. I mean, we talked about it last week. How isn't it so damning that we finally take steps forward? We finally figure some things out, feel good about ourselves. We're 4-2, yet somehow we're 4th in the division. Like, what are the odds,
Yeah, it's one of those things where we'll kind of see how that plays out over the course of the year, right? Because Minnesota is starting to show a little bit of warts there, with Detroit kind of finishing that one out on top, and that maybe certainly Minnesota is very good. Not that none of these are bad teams, but maybe they're not as invincible as we thought they would. And the Bears last year played Detroit really tight in both games, beat them once, and probably should have beat them in the other game as well. And then I think of those 3 teams, Green Bay is probably the worst of the 3 right now. And you feel like the Bears have closed that gap quite a bit. And depending on whether you get the superhero Jordan Love or the supervillain Jordan Love, he seems to have big plays in the positive and negative in every game. Like I do feel like the Bears can still be right there with any of those 3 teams, but there's still a lot the Bears have to prove, right? Like we haven't seen them consistently do it, even when we feel like they're close. So it still feels to be like those are winnable games, but they're not going to earn the benefit of the doubt just yet.
Moving kind of along with that question, we had this similar question last year, I think, or I'm sorry, not last year, last week, was how do you feel what the Bears have demonstrated so far kind of stacks up with this NFC North? You kind of walked us through that, but do you feel like this is a team that is stacking up quite close? Are they like 85% there with these teams, or are they full on a year away?
Yeah, I think they're pretty darn close to Green Bay at this point, just because I still see Green Bay as a younger team that's still a little volatile. That they can have the great defensive performance against CJ Stroud, but then early on in the year they had some more difficult issues trying to slow down opposing offenses. So I'm not sold on the Packers being super steady every single week. I mean, they're 5-2; they're a good team, but I'm not sold on them being like so much head and shoulders above of where the Bears are right now. I do think the Vikings and Lions feel a step ahead, where over the course of the season, I think they're going to be those 2 teams are better teams than the Bears right now. But in any 1 week sample matchup, like especially against the Lions, I feel like that's a game that the Bears could steal 1, or I mean, heaven forbid, maybe 2 in that one. Whereas like Minnesota scares me a little bit more, just in terms of like Brian Flores being able to get so aggressive against this offense and against Caleb Williams, and maybe throw some things at him that a lot of other teams won't. And like I think Caleb can handle the Lions as a matchup a little bit easier than what the Vikings present, even though I think the Lions are probably the overall better team as a whole. I just think the coaching wise and scheme wise, he can handle Detroit a little bit better than what Minnesota is really going to go all out aggressive on you, which in those kind of games, it's super volatile. Anything can happen.
Yeah, one thing's for sure, that if we are going to sit there and keep up with either of any 3 of those teams, we're going to have to bring our A game to the table, and they're going to be fun matchups regardless, which makes the end of the season very exciting. I mean, I can't wait to play some of these divisional games and exactly see where the Bears stand compared to the rest of the NFC North, because just like you said, I think we're capable any given Sunday. Like we have the shot. I wouldn't feel so great about it as to give them the benefit of the doubt yet. I mean, you said it perfectly, but we're there, or if not, we're at least knocking on the door. And if we are just, a step ahead of where we should be, oh man, will those be really fun games to watch and see.
I think that the fun thing about that too is that we'll know, like, because the NFC North is so good this season, that when the Bears get through that stretch where it's, Lions, Vikings, Packers, 49ers, Vikings, Lions, again, some order in that, we'll know by the end of that if this Bears team can actually make some noise in the playoffs, or maybe just how far away they are. Like we're not gonna go in the end of the year wondering, hey, is this team actually any good or not? Like we will find out pretty quickly where they match up in the pecking order there, and it'll give us some clarity heading into the end of the season, and then the potential of the postseason question.
I think for me, this is why I want Jaden Daniels to play next week so badly, because I I'm kind of in favor of the Bears getting favorability and luck with injuries and schedule and all that stuff. And I think so far it's been absolutely perfect. And I think as the next few weeks go on, I think it's even lining up even better in luck with them. But I'm kind of sick of hearing about the Bears. Well, they should have beaten these guys. They should have beaten these guys. They should have, they barely beat 1-5 teams. And, when you look at even play teams like Washington's every single opponent is either 1-5 or 1-6 now, or 2-5. Go back and look at Houston's record. Houston is beating up on bottom feeders, and they're, competing with one or two teams here and there. They are competing with those guys, but at the end of the day, they're still losing. So that's why I kind of really want Jaden Daniels to play, because at the very least you find out, I don't really care so much about this rookie race, this rookie of the year race. Doesn't really interest me. I think I like both players. Both players can be good. But I'm really hoping Jaden Daniels is healthy, just so we can actually see or kind of start to sift through how actually good the Bears are. Because if they beat Washington, I think the perception changes pretty dramatically.
Yeah, I also feel like people who want to paint that narrative for the Bears can find it in Washington too, though, that like, okay, yeah, they have more wins, but I mean, prior to the Panthers game last week where they crushed them, but prior to that game, their defense was ranked like 20th, I think, in like yards and points. So you could say again, like, well, okay, Caleb Williams had another big game against another bad defense. Even though it was a better team that the Bears beat, it was still a quote unquote bad defense, which I still think is not a super strong argument either way, but you can always find holes to poke. I don't think we're going to see the Bears earn much of that like contender versus pretender respect until it's Packers, Vikings, Lions, because then you still got the Cardinals and the Patriots between then. And even a win of Washington will help a lot. It'll be the most help they've had all year, but people are still going to want to doubt until they see how they stack up with the rest of the division.
It does feel very personal, maybe just as Bears fans, but it does feel like that narrative is always kind of particularly painted about the Bears. And I guess I could see it from a national perspective too, but at the same time, there's plenty of teams that in my mind, I'm like, I could poke holes in these teams as well. And so I don't know, maybe it just feels like we're being personally attacked because it's our team. But that's why I think like a Washington victory against a full healthy team is going to be a little bit better than if you play Mariota and you smoke Mariota. That's going to be the first thing everyone says is, hey, it's Mariota. What did you think was going to happen? Blah, 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 blah. So
I think it comes back to some of that benefit of the doubt stuff, though, right? It's like every time in the past that we thought the Bears might be getting good, they would disappoint. So I understand why, nationally people say, oh, the Bears are playing well, but like we don't trust them yet because it's kind of been a fool me once, shame on me thing. Fool me every year for the last decade, shame on you,
Yeah,
100%. And just to kind of go off that a little bit more, yeah, you're completely right with that you have to earn it. You have to earn that benefit of the doubt. And we haven't yet. History has not dictated us getting that kind of respect, and that's why we don't. So that could change, but you got to go out there and change it. And I know we've preached change a lot. I've heard Ryan Poles say it over and over, and change in time, right? Like we got to change this thing, but we got to change it the right way. And so for me, it's really big to go out there and, I'm very hopeful that we could sweep the Packers this year. I would be so thrilled with getting 2 wins against them because for me, that's a statement and it's a sign of change. It's something that we haven't been able to do. So I don't even want just one win. I want them both. And yeah, I think it's things like that really matter for me this season, those type of statements.
It feels to me like I'd be happy starting with 1 because, I mean, how many years has it been since they've beaten Green Bay head-to-head? I was just pulling up the records.
I think it's 5 years. It's 10 games in a row.
It was the end of the 2018 year with Matt Nagy was the last time the Packers lost to the Bears. So I'll take 1. 2 would be great, but just 1 even would represent progress and change, especially when I think Packers fans are feeling very, very confident about where they are too. And it's kind of that rare time where maybe you could knock them down a few pegs with it as well.
Paulie, I mean, I don't know how structured we want to go here because I do have a question for Lauren in the sense of if you had Jim Harbaugh here, do you think part of that benefit of the doubt is some of the coaching staff? Like, do you feel if we had an upgrade or had taken that upgrade chance with like a guy like Jim Harbaugh, you have Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator, do you think that would have helped some of that benefit of doubt? Or do you think that that's just a stink on the Bears as a franchise and as as a whole product on the field? Or do you think it's partially there is a certain vibe to this team, that shaky start with Waldron and then him kind of stepping it up a little bit, the fact that, Matt Eberfluh's first time in his career just won 3 games in a row. Do you think part of that is that, or Is it mostly just kind of like a franchise turn of the corner type of, we just went from a rebuild to now we got to see it be consistent, or is it more of like a personality of the team thing?
Yeah, I
maybe
think
that's just, from your perspective.
Was a fun example there because, with him on the Chargers instead, the Chargers are another one of these teams that I think people trust them more generally than the Bears as a team that contends often, but the Chargers have that like Chargers curse kind of thing where they just always find ways to mess things up and do things wrong when they'll be leading in a game and then blow the lead at the end, and the Chargers are going to charger. And I don't think hiring Harbaugh has completely erased that for them either at this point. And I think in either case for the Bears or the Chargers, whether it's Harbaugh here or Harbaugh there, like it's going to take time for that coach to break that from those teams by winning and earning that benefit of the doubt from consistently winning those games and not blowing those games in the case of the Chargers. I mean, they led against the Chiefs 10-0 in the first quarter earlier this year and lost. And I think they were leading early against the Steelers as well in that other loss. So they haven't been able to shake it with Harbaugh. So I don't think the Bears would have been able to just yet either.
Yeah. One of the things we asked on our channel, trade deadline's coming up. And for the last 2 years, the Bears have traded a second-round pick away at the deadline, once for Chase Claypool, once for Montez Sweat. We traded Roquan Smith away right at the deadline. So we've been busy right at the deadline historically in the last 2 years with Ryan Poles. I'm not so convinced that we'll be in it as much value-wise this year. I don't think we're getting rid of any high picks or anything like that. But I asked the question on our channel, like, should the Bears make a move at the trade deadline? And the 4 options I gave everybody was yes, add defensive line, yes, add offensive line, yes, trade somebody away, or no, and just stay put. And to my surprise, 51% of the people voted to add offensive line. And I think that is still a big concern for this team depth-wise. But I don't think you're finding any quality offensive linemen out there at the trade deadline. But I'm just going to shoot the question right your way as well. Should the Bears make a move at the trade deadline?
Yeah, I think I'm in the same page you are there, where if somehow there was some team that was willing to trade away a quality starting offensive lineman at the deadline, I would certainly call and find out what that's worth. But you just don't see good off, like if a team has a good offensive lineman, they don't really have much incentive at all to trade them unless they're old or expensive. And I don't think the Bears really want an old or expensive offensive lineman. Like they could trade for somebody like Nate Davis, but that you already have a Nate Davis at home that you don't want anyway. So to me, it just doesn't feel like there's the right fit there where it's like, yeah, but no other team is going to want to give up a good young offensive lineman. You could get like an older guy like Brandon Scherf from the Jacksonville Jaguars, who's very expensive and they're a bad team anyway. But he's also like 33. So it's really just kind of a 1 year thing. And I think that's what I come back to for the Bears here. It's like any trade you would make at the deadline this year is not about making the team better for 2024. Like if you make a trade, it's about making the team better for 2025, 26, and 27. Like Montez Sweat wasn't about winning more games last year all that much. It was about giving you a pass rush for the next 5 years. And so unless there's that kind of player available, which I don't think Myles Garrett's not going to be available, Max Crosby's not going to be available, Micah Parsons not going to be available. The pipe dream guys are not going to be available. And I don't think the Bears are going to pull the trigger on a big splash like that. So I see the Bears more keeping it quiet. And if anything, they trade away Nate Davis or Khalil Herbert or Velus Jones, like just to get something for a player you're not using anyway. But I think it's going to be relatively quiet compared to previous years.
Yeah, David, I know you always talk about in terms of trades. Are you taking a step back? Are you taking a step forward? Or are you just taking a step sideways? And I think, if you're going to go off and target some offensive linemen and get rid of Nate Davis in the same process, you might just be taking a step sideways rather than forward, right? So I don't know, David, what do you think though? Should the Bears make a move at the trade deadline at all?
I don't know yet. And that's kind of where I'm standing with the Bears because luckily the trade deadline, I think, is November 8th, if I'm not mistaken, or November 9th. I want to say it's
or something. Yeah, it's
after like that. But we basically get to do
our matchup on the 3rd. It's like 2 days after.
So exactly. So we do get to see a little bit more football from the Bears. And I think kind of what we've been hinting towards, even that stink on the Bears or not being sure, proving that they're consistent. If they're 6-2 at the trade deadline, I think you become buyers rather than sellers. And I think like we were talking about at the beginning, watching these teams during the bye week, and you kind of see what the bad teams are and what their position of values are, and are they becoming quick sellers and doing a full rebuild. And I was kind of surprised, Lauren, that you said that Max Crosby, Myles Garrett, those guys are not going to be available. I could see the Micah Parsons one. I could see them being available. I just don't think that it's at a price that the Bears would be willing to pay or want to pay or would be worth paying. But I could see a team like Detroit, who's in full-on win now mode, if they need to give up a first and a second for Myles Garrett, and Cleveland needs to recoup some of those losses from Deshaun Watson or something like that. I could see it happening. I wouldn't be shocked by it. But I guess, you would know better for sure than I would. I just think it's unrealistic. Yeah. But is it impossible? Probably not. I think teams like Detroit or, Kansas City, who are ready to go, I think are more likely to invest in that. With the Bears, like Paulie said, I just don't think any one of these moves is going to be a step forward considerably for this season. Even if you do get an offensive lineman in the middle of the season, those guys take long times to gel. It's not necessarily an upgrade physically. All these guys are 6'5", 350 pounds. It comes down to coaching, technique, and how they gel with the rest of those teammates. So training for a guy like that could be necessarily like not a great step forward. And then you're not really lining yourself up for something positive in the future, because like you said, they're going to be expensive. They're going to be old. And at that point, I'd rather keep the 38th pick in the draft for a left guard. So I don't know. My long answer is that my short answer is not yet, with a possibility of, I'm leaning towards 80-20. Don't make any moves this year.
I just want to really quickly answer Naj, who would want Vilas. I think the animal cruelty shelter needs somebody to rehab their ferrets. And I think that's going to be about the only person interested. I don't know who out there would be interested in Vilas. What do you think, Lauren?
Well, do you remember during Hard Knocks, right during roster cutdown day, Ryan Pohl said they got a trade offer for Velus Jones
for fifth.
Yeah, and it wasn't enough for them then, but we don't know what team that was. But I'd call back that team and say, hey, we'd take a seventh. I mean, just take anything. You're going to cut him eventually. You might as well get whatever draft pick they'd give you. So at least one team had interest in Velus Jones a month and a half ago. So maybe even at a lower price, they could still have some interest in him. If he's just going to sit on the bench as a healthy scratch anyway, why not get something for him?
Well, I definitely wouldn't give him any more opportunities here on this team. I think he's exhausted all those. So that's all that's left for him is sitting on the bench. What other players do you think might be targets to shop around to other teams?
Well, we've seen Ian Rappaport and others have mentioned Khalil Herbert as someone who the Bears have gotten calls about. Apparently the Vikings had called about Herbert before they traded for Cam Akers, who's been on that team before. But the Bears kind of said, yeah, we're not going to send Khalil Herbert to a division rival. And I do find myself feeling like Herbert's almost more value. I mean, I get wanting to get something for him at the end of his rookie contract. He'll be a free agent this summer. I don't think they're going to re-sign him because they have DeAndre Swift and Roshan Johnson ahead of him. So why not get something for him now at the deadline? I get that, but I also feel like if, heaven forbid, DeAndre Swift gets injured or Roshan Johnson gets injured, like Herbert's a really good running back, and it would be nice to have that insurance policy option there. Like, is it worth, if you give up for a 6th round, would you have a 6th round pick for him, or have him just in case of injury? Because he can still be a guy that can get you 4 or 5 yards of carry. We've seen him be a really good running back in a rotation. He just kind of fell out of this rotation, but he can still be a good player for you in a pinch if you need him. And I feel like I'd rather have that than a 6th round pick, but I don't know if you could get a 5th or a 5th and a 7th or something. Maybe you can start to talk me out of it, but it's Herbert, it's Nate Davis, it's Velus Jones. It's really just the players you're not using that you don't even really see being around next season that you might as well get something for if you're going to lose them anyway.
I mean, last year, this team was pretty injured at the running back position.
Yeah.
I believe we had 4 guys go down. So I could see depth at that position being something to
Darrington Evanson was a player.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I don't know, David, what do you think? Other than Herbert, Nate Davis, Velus Jones, are there any other guys you think would be possible candidates? Elijah Hicks?
No, and even then I'd be frankly shocked that Nate Davis could even get you much value. Even, I would argue that Khalil Herbert at this point is probably more of a value, even though running backs just don't get traded for much. I'm with Lauren 100% on that one. And I even at the beginning of the year, I didn't want even to entertain the idea that Khalil Herbert was getting cut. I thought that was an insane story from the very beginning because, like you said, it's what are you going to do? You're going to have a 6th round pick, and then you got to go sign a guy off the streets in week 8 or 9 when your running back core is depleted. We went through, I think, 6 running backs last year. There was a point where Kerry Blasingame was one of the 2 running backs on the roster with Darrington Evans because everybody went down with injury for like a 2-week stretch, and that was pretty bad. So that I would keep Herbert and let him ride it out. I don't think you're getting much value out of a 6th-round pick anyway. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is better to have Darrington Evans and a 6th-round pick. Get him off the street. That's
we draft
the future that we can't predict.
Herbert? But didn't we draft Herbert in the 6th?
I think
it's either the 4th or the 5th,
if I'm not mistaken.
It was a 5th. Okay.
No, he's a 6th-round pick. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, if you can come out even after getting usage out of him for 4 years, that might not be the worst thing. But let me throw an oddball at you guys. What if somebody calls you out about Tevin Jenkins?
Yeah, and then similarly, no.
Yeah, I don't think I'm moving anybody on this offensive line other than Nate Davis. Like you need the depth here, even though Tevin has an injury history or whatever, and he's on the last year of his contract. But I just don't think there's any room to budge on the offensive line with anybody not named Nate Davis at this point.
David, anything else?
No, I think Lauren's got it nailed down, and Nate Davis, I'd just be more interested than anything for what his value would be if teams are actually calling and what are they calling for. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that. It's probably a 5th, 6th, or a 7th. I can't imagine anything higher than that. And at that point, the amount of money you're paying for him, yeah, I mean, I guess you could clear that off the books, but I don't know if that's worth it even for losing him for depth, because he's a pretty decent depth starter, I would suppose, than a guy off the street.
Agreed.
Well, so I'm a firm believer in your defensive line can never be good enough. And, I like what David said about how he's not sure yet where her position is coming up to the trade deadline, because these next 2 weeks could really impact that. If you do rattle off 2 more wins and you are 6-2, there's going to be a real kind of need to almost add to this team, because the window in the NFL, when it opens, it sometimes doesn't stay very open for long. So you got to take advantage of every opportunity you get whenever that opportunity presents itself. So as far as the defensive line, if we were to add somebody to the defensive line, we talked about Mike Parsons, Max Crosby, Myles Garrett not being very realistic candidates. Do you have somebody else out there? Any other names that maybe aren't top tier starter guys, but could still add to the depth of this rotation and still make an impact on this team?
There's not a lot that jumps to mind. I mean, maybe like Trey Hendrickson from the Cincinnati Bengals, but I think the Bengals are always going to feel like they're still a contender as long as they've got Joe Burrow. But, after if they lose a couple more games, they're 3-4 right now and seem to be figuring some things out. But if we get closer to the trade deadline and they're 3-6, I mean, even then they probably still say, hey, they can go on a run and come back and not trade one of their top pass rushers. I mean, it's kind of like the offensive line question. It's like, okay, is there a team with a really good young pass rusher that they're going to just want to give up all of a sudden? I mean, the Commanders did it with Montez Sweat, so never say never. People have pointed out like Trayvon Walker from the Jacksonville Jaguars, although again, I think good teams want to keep their young players, especially when they're already under contract for a few more years. So if I'm the Bears, I'd look more to add on the interior anyway for some more depth there, and not necessarily take more snaps away from guys like Austin Booker and Darrell Taylor, who you want to see develop and grow too.
Yeah, David, this was slow pitched your way for your Cameron Jordan take. Just lobbing it to you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Lauren, I've literally since preseason week 1, I have been obsessed with the idea of, thank you for that lollipop, fat, slow pitch softball. I want Cameron Jordan so badly on this team, and I think he fits in absolutely perfectly. He is one of those older guys on an expiring contract. I don't think it would take much to get him. I think he's like a 5th-round pick probably at this point. The Saints are in an absolute catastrophic cap situation right now. They need to clear the books as fast as humanly possible, and that's why I think, thankfully, these 2 weeks additionally kind of dictate where the Saints are going to be and where the Bears are going to be. And I think Cam Jordan's like the perfect fit for this team, the perfect fit for the scheme itself as well, because like you said, I don't necessarily want to take away snaps from like Austin Booker. I think Darrell Taylor has been playing out of his mind. Even Chris Williams kind of flashes every once in a while. But what Cameron Jordan has been talking about, and I've just been following the Saints in the offseason because I've just been obsessed with the idea of Cam Jordan on the Bears. Cam Jordan lost like 20 pounds so that he could slide inside and play 3-tech and play outside defensive end. So he's basically just like a souped up DeMarcus Walker in the role that we have him playing here. So that's my favorite, like, kind of go-to. And I don't think Cam Jordan is going to cost you a lot. It's fourth, I think, at most. He's 34 years old. He's pretty expensive, and the Saints are probably just going to look to dump him as soon as they're kind of dead set on where their team is headed, because that is a absolute, I think, rebuild team. We talk about these rebuild teams and where these teams are at. I think the Saints are my number one on a full-on, like, complete rebuild. So I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but that's kind of my dream scenario.
Yeah, I'm on board with any trade for a lineman on either side of the ball that, like, costs you a 5th round pick or less, right? Like, I think the fear for me is giving up a 1st or a 2nd or maybe even a 3rd for a guy that is more of a short-term option there. I just feel like the Bears need those 1st and 2nd round picks to just keep restocking the roster with young players on rookie contracts to develop and grow and keep building that foundation around Caleb. But yeah, a 5th round pick for even an aging pass rusher like Cameron Jordan that you feel like, even if it's just a 1-year rental, can give you a little bit of a boost without really mortgaging much of your favor. I'm definitely much of your future. I'm definitely in favor of that.
Yeah. And, we've talked about kind of just going through the history of Ryan Poles' moves and his free agency moves versus his draft picks. And I wanted to ask you, where do you think he's better at as a general manager? Going out there and making moves in free agency and in trades, or drafting these young guys?
Yeah, I think generally free agency has been underwhelming, but I mean, if you lump trades into there, then it balances out a lot better. I think the trades, I mean, outside of the Chase Claypool trade, it's generally done pretty darn well on the trade market there. And, no GM is going to be perfect on trades. No GM is going to be perfect in the draft. No GM is going to be perfect in free agency. But, like, Darrell Taylor was a trade. Chris Williams was a trade. Keenan Allen, obviously a huge, important trade for this team. There's a few others. I don't know, Ryan Bates, we still haven't gotten the jury on just yet, but I'm optimistic that he can at least be of value to this team in that regard. Like, he's found good enough value in trades to feel really good about. Draft picks, he's going to have misses, but for the most part, the early picks have panned out the way the Bears have wanted it to. Like, I feel pretty confident in his ability to draft among the better general managers and trade among the better general managers. And then, yeah, free agency has been hit and miss, but it's hard to find any GM that is consistently good in free agency. I think Poles is probably more like average in free agency. And so that's where you almost prefer to trade for Montez Sweat and give him a big contract as opposed to waiting to see whatever free agent's going to hit the market, because the really good players never actually hit free agency. So that, like, you feel a little more comfortable spending cap space on giving your own guys big contracts like Jalen Johnson, or maybe trading for a guy that you give a big contract to. But you got to really be sure, because there's a lot of risk in bringing in an outside guy and then investing a bunch of money in him before you really know if he's the right fit.
I'd like to kind of piggyback, kind of combine this comment here. And then, if you look at Poles' track record, he usually says he trades for players with upsides. And I do agree with that comment in the terms of the Bears' history, but I think that's why we're mentioning so much about where this team is going to be in 2 weeks, because, yeah, 2 years ago, last 2 years, you do need to look for guys with upside for 2nd round picks, because this team could not take, older aging players. A guy like even Keenan Allen, I don't think you're making that move last year for Justin Fields, even if it was for a 4th round pick, right? So we are right on the cusp of that tilt in the bar graph where, yeah, a year ago, 2 years ago, Cameron Jordan would have made no sense. But if you're 6-2 and you just need that little extra kick to go from a really, really good defense to just an absolute top 5 dominant pass rush every single week, I think that's where those veteran moves kind of start coming into play. And that's where this team we're kind of still all deciding. And even Lauren hinted at it. None of us really know yet. Even us as fans are kind of hesitant to be excited as like a top team. But at 6-2, I mean, you're going to have to rip me off the bandwagon, because I'm going to be latched on with like handcuffs. So that's where Cam Jordan's of the world kind of come into play.
It's funny you address that, because I literally wanted to bring that up and pretty much took the words out of my mouth. Dude, there's different phases to being a GM. The rebuild phase is the one we've probably seen most GMs succeed at the most often. It's once you get good, keeping that going is hard. I mean, it's extremely hard after you win a Super Bowl to sit there and stay good and retool and things like that. So there's multiple different phases to the GM position. And yeah, you said it really well, David. I think we're teeter-tottering right there. We're done with the rebuild and we're starting to compete. Now, if the record also reflects that and we are 6-2, then you are competing. It's time to start thinking a little bit differently and make some moves that probably don't mimic the historical ways you've been doing things from Ryan Pohl's point of view.
I think in that same vein, you look ahead a little bit too and think, okay, this offseason, in this upcoming offseason, you're going to need at least one guard and one center, plus whatever you decide with Tevin Jenkins. If you re-sign him or don't, you might need a second guard there. And you've got guys like Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon will be coming into the last year of their rookie contract, so they're going to be eligible for big contract extensions. So it's easy to see the $70 million in cap space or whatever the Bears are projected to have right now next year and say, oh, they've got plenty of room to keep retooling and adding pieces here at the deadline and stuff. But at the same time, some big contracts are on the horizon. I know TJ Edwards will be entering the last year of his deal, Marcus Walker in the last year of this deal next year. Like, there's a bunch of guys that are that have been here in this rebuilding process that you're going to have to make decisions on and either replace or re-sign, and probably cost more money. And certainly the more success you have, the more expensive, the better players are going to end up being. And that's where you run into trouble as a GM, right? Okay, players are good, team gets good, but then you can't keep the band together. So how you plan ahead with cap space and either cap space to re-sign them or draft capital to replace them cheaper really goes a long way.
And I think I'm going to kind of speak for Paulie's mentality on these windows in the NFL, right? Because like you're saying, Lauren, like it's going to be hard to keep this band together. And to me, my personal thing, like I was not supremely confident in this defense moving forward into this year, because I just know in the NFL how fickle defense is and how you could be a top 5 defense. We saw it ourselves 2018 and how much that regressed and how quickly, just on instincts or like player talent or health or whatever it is. And that's where if you are 6-2 and this team, I know that that's a kind of contradictory statement where you're 6-2, you got to get as much out of this defense as you can while you can, because that's maybe a one more year thing after the fact. So yeah, it does suck to kind of invest if that's where you have a hard time playing that game. Are you investing for right now because your window is open right now and you need to make this team just a little bit better in one area? Or now do you have to start retooling? Because I think sometimes that retooling process maybe backfires on teams a little bit more than they think it does, even when the case of like the Chiefs and they get George Karlaftis and right, that team is still good, but I think that's more Steve Spagnuolo than I think the talent on the field. They're really good, but with the Bears, I think that somebody's going to be pissed very shortly with who's leaving. Is it Kyler? Is it Jaquan? Is it Tevin? All 3 of those guys will not be on this team in 2 years. That is like a mathematical fact more than anything. So where are you going to pick? You actually kind of took the words out of my mouth. Do you feel like Tevin Jenkins has earned his contract yet?
Not through 6 games, but through 18, could he still? Maybe, but to me, the thing with Tevin is more about just availability than actual ability. I think, yes, he didn't have a very good start to the season performance-wise, but he started to play better the last couple of weeks. And it's a question of like, okay, after the bye week here, can he stay healthy for the last 11 games of the season here? Like that's the bigger concern for me with him. And honestly, that was a concern with Jalen Johnson as well, but he did it and it's paid off so well. So we'll give Tevin one more shot at this, but I just have this feeling like there's going to be enough of those questions by the end of the year where he misses a couple games still. And you're like, okay, you'll get 10 to 12 games of Tevin Jenkins every year. How much is that worth? And that's going to be an awkward one for the Bears to work through here. And I'm not sure that there's an easy answer that everyone's going to be happy with.
Yeah, I don't know how much that number. Sorry, Paul.
No, I think other teams out there will be willing to pay more because they might not be so close to the situation and have all those questions. So, no, I hear you. Go ahead, David.
Oh, no, we were talking about that not too long ago about what these guards are getting paid now. Guys like Robert Hunt and stuff. Do you know that number off the top of your head? Because it was kind of mind-blowing for us when we heard it the first time when we Googled it.
Yeah, I don't off the top of my head, but I'm pretty fast at looking here.
I want to say Robert Hunt was like 18 or 19 million a year.
That's what that's the number that was in my head, but I'm
20. So we have Landon Dickerson, average 21 a year. Chris Lindstrom averaged 20 and a half, and Robert Hunt averaged 20. Quentin Nelson averaged 20. I mean, you got a couple other guys, Samuel Cosme, 18 and a half, Zach Martin, almost 18 and a half. So yeah, they are definitely getting their fair share of the salary.
Tevin's not any one of those guys, but he's definitely inching up to like that 15, 14 by another team. And we probably want to give him 11 or 12.
Yeah, I was thinking 12 myself.
Yeah, and he's going to go for as much as he can get there. And I don't, because on the one hand, like, I don't want to commit all that to Tevin Jenkins, but you got to invest in the offensive line. Like at the end of the day, you have to, I mean, they have not put enough into that position financially, draft pick wise, any of it. And so that would be an easy way to do it, and a great way to say, okay, here, we're putting some real money in this group. But at the same time, I don't love that investment. But then you got to replace all three of your interior guys in one offseason. You can't do that all in. I don't want to sign 3 starting free agents because that doesn't always go that well. But you can't put 3 rookies in there. So that's a lot. There's a lot to replace there. And I just wonder if, I mean, unless like Ryan Bates comes back and has a great year, and okay, there's one of your starters, then maybe it becomes easier to let Tevin Jenkins go. But a lot of time to still figure that out, and I'm glad it's not my decision. It's Ryan Poles who has to make the tough calls.
Yeah, you're making me even more excited to tell people who hate on Braxton Jones to just stop it, because the Braxton Jones hate is insane when you have problems like this on the interior.
But he's going to be in the same conversation because next year is the last year of his rookie contract too. So like, he's not ready for a big contract extension, but another year from now, we'll be talking about, okay, do you have to make a change at left tackle or not? I mean, it'll depend on how the rest of the offensive line is, but I agree. I think Braxton Jones is good enough, and ideally you could upgrade that position, but you don't need to. So if he's your worst offensive lineman, you're sitting pretty on the offensive line. So let's address everything else first, and then we can get to the Braxton Jones question.
There was a story with Tevin Jenkins about how he realized after 2 or 3 years in the league how important it is to start getting massages on a regular basis. And I kind of went back to that quarterbacks documentary on Netflix where you saw Kirk Cousins talk about how early on in his career he played with Santana Moss. And Santana Moss, being a longtime veteran in the NFL, told him it's so important to take care of your body and get loosened up and get massages regularly, even early on. And so just to be a little fun and quirky here, I started thinking, like, so has Deshaun Watson still been getting massages? Because it is important for your health and career. And then, I mean, obviously, he just went out with the Achilles rupture, but no, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to be a little dumb and goofy here. But man, just speaking of quarterbacks in general, I don't know if you want to answer that, Lauren. If you got an answer for me, are they supervised?
Glad that Jenkins has been doing stuff for his body and stuff, and you hope it makes a difference. But I can't help but remember, like, I remember last offseason, 2023, the big storyline was, Tevin Jenkins started doing Pilates and it's strengthening his back and his core. So that was supposed to be the cure of like, he's taking better care of his body, and then still misses 6 games or whatever it was last season. So I'm kind of at this point now with Tevin where, yeah, I'm glad to hear that he's doing more for his body every year, but until that actually manifests itself with more durability on the field, I'm not quite sold that this change is going to be the one that finally fixes it for him.
Definitely. And I just want to talk about the quarterback, man. I know me and David have been very, very impressed with Caleb Williams and his growth and the rate of his growth. And I just wanted to kind of get your overall general take on the Bears quarterback and how he's been progressing and what you think his future may look like here, even just through the end of the season.
Yeah, I'm with you that the rate from week 1 even to week 3, and then from week 3 to now, like, has been even faster than I would have expected from where he started from. I mean, I think before we got to week 1, we expected maybe he would have started farther ahead than he was in week 1. But then I think from where he started in week 1 to now has been faster once we saw where he was starting from. It's been incredible to see the way that he's, the command he gets at the line of scrimmage in terms of changing protections and checking in and out of plays. Like, not a lot of rookie quarterbacks get that kind of responsibility and then also handle that kind of responsibility as correctly and accurately as Caleb Williams has. And then, after the snap, going through progressions, looking off safeties, hitting really tight window throws. Like, I don't care that they've been against lower quality defenses. Like, a tight window throw, a back shoulder up the seam in the end zone, that's a tough throw, whether it's a Jaguars linebacker or a Detroit Lions linebacker or a Minnesota Vikings linebacker. Like, it's the difficulty of the throw is not any different when the coverage is that close, whether the player is actually any good or not. Like, it's still a hard throw, and like looking off safeties and all those things are like really translatable skills and development that Caleb Williams has done that I trust will apply against better defenses. That doesn't mean I think he's going to have 300 yards and 4 touchdowns against better defenses, but I think like the individual personal player development will translate against better defenses, and you can feel confident that he's going to be able to do his part. I have less confidence in, like, say, the offensive line against better defenses, but I don't have a lot of worry about how is Caleb going to handle it when the Lions and the Packers come to town. The Vikings and Brian Flores, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Scheme-wise, that might be a new challenge for him the first time he plays them, but not the second time. Like this kid is smart, and I think he'll be just fine.
David, isn't that exactly what you just said the other week?
That's so funny. That's literally like, that's, I think why we were smiling and nodding is even using that exact word for word comparison of a tight window throw over a linebacker. At that point, the linebacker doesn't matter. The throw is what matters. And that's what it's so funny. It's like we literally watched each other's videos, word for word almost. And so like, that's kind of what we've been alluding to. And I think that's what we kind of came to the conclusion is that his floor is obscenely high 6 weeks in because of those kinds of qualities that you're talking about, Lauren, that we've observed is, looking off safeties. Like, yes, the quality of the defenses will improve, the quality of the schemes will improve, but we're already getting to the point where I think with Caleb Williams, defensive coordinators have to think of ways to trick him rather than making him one-dimensional, because he isn't one-dimensional. He has already showed the layers of things that he can do, whether it's with 2 tight ends, with 4 wide. Nowadays, and this is traumatized Bears fan in me, where I saw Justin Fields in a 5 wide set, and I just said, why waste your time? What are you doing with a 5 wide set? It's going to be a 1 read, or it's going to be a screen or a bubble screen or a fake screen on one side, screen to the other. We like to reference Henry Winkler a lot, right? And a lot of the you fake it left, then you fake it right, then you pretend to fake, and then you run it up the middle, Justin Fields.
You think about faking.
Right. Whereas like with Caleb, every time there's just a package out there, I'm like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Let's see what he does with this, because he's already kind of earned that floor, and that doubt is already kind of disappearing very quickly, in a short amount of time, like we were saying, that I think you're going to start seeing, consistency to the point where, he'll have like 20 completions per game. How much for the yardage wise? I don't know, but he's not going to be failing. He's not going to be I don't think you're going to see many 9 to 12 completion stinkers in his first year even. And that's what we've kind of grown as a standard over 2-3 years almost, even going back to Trubisky, where we would see quarterbacks that play and they have like 9, 10, 12 completions because they just could not figure things out. I don't think that this is going to be his issue. I think the floor is obscenely high already. That's kind of it.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been really impressed, and I think it's something that's sustainable too. I think that this is the way a quarterback should be progressing and should be growing. And this is kind of like the map that we've seen in the past of quarterbacks getting better, where they reach a point where they are just damn good. And, I take a look at this landscape of this league, and to me, it's all about having that quarterback that's damn good. And I know that, there's good teams out there and everything like that, but it just seems to be like everybody versus Patrick Mahomes, because Patrick Mahomes is just that much better than everybody. And the guys that are competing against them are all on the AFC side. You have Lamar, you have Joe Burrow, you have Josh Allen. Whereas the NFC is a little bit more open than that. And so, this is one thing that we've talked about. Like, what kind of opportunity do you think we have here long-term in the NFC? Like, I know Ryan Poles said, take the NFC North and never give it back. But truly, like, there's a position for one guy like Aaron Rodgers had for a long time to just be the best damn quarterback in the NFC, because the competition out there isn't all that great. I don't know. Do you feel the same way, Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like right now it's probably Jared Goff, which is weird. Like I don't think I was going to think that 12 months ago, but like it's Goff and Jaden Daniels and maybe Jordan Love. We'll see, but yeah, I mean, it's a wide open landscape right now, and I'm certainly happy to be one of those teams with that quarterback on a rookie contract, as opposed to the $50 million a year or whatever that Jordan Love's got. And I know Jared Goff's up in the 40s or whatever it is. Like it's going to be harder for those teams to build to properly support those quarterbacks for as long as it will be for the Commanders and the Bears, at least for the duration of the rookie contracts. That's why it's so important to hit these windows now, like we were talking about.
Yeah, I've been big on this bandwagon. I kind of presented this thought experiment to Paul even early on. It's kind of frustrating to me that guys like Lamar or Josh Allen are not in the NFC, because that would have been just such an incredible like string of Super Bowls. I think Josh Allen in the NFC probably goes to at least 3 out of 5 Super Bowls in the last 5 years. You know, he keeps kind of rolling in it. So that's where we entertain and kind of start to that.
David, I think you're breaking up a little bit. Yeah.
We start he is then
David, hold on. Let's give David a moment. To what David was saying, there is a huge opportunity here. And we've talked about how, the 5th, 6th, 7th best quarterback in the AFC might just be the top guy in the NFC. And it's kind of damning because, on the other hand, you have Aaron Rodgers, who kind of held the cake here, and he goes to the AFC and look at the result, right? Like, it's just not that easy, guy. And hold on, I think we have David back here. Maybe not. Yeah, I think he's going to restart real quick. So, yeah, it's an interesting landscape. But for me, that it's always been so important. And I know a lot of people made an argument for the Hall and trading back and this and that. And it's like that's great and all. But for me, it's so important just to have that quarterback position be what leads you through a hard time.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I mean, even you look at a team like San Francisco, right, with all the injuries they've had around Brock Purdy, like they've had the financial freedom because of the cheap quarterbacks there, and they've had a presumably well-talented, well-coached team. But even a team like that, it just takes the right couple of dominoes to fall incorrectly. And not that they're, a broken team that's totally out of it by any means, but not the juggernaut that we thought they once were. And we're still kind of waiting for that to figure itself out. But there's some legit long-term questions there now without McCaffrey probably for the whole season, and without Brandon Ayuk has the big injury. Like, they're missing some key pieces, and they don't seem to have a lot of answers right now.
Did you see Kyle Shanahan? There was a report on there. I have to check on its legitimacy still, but I saw one where he spent like 5 minutes just kind of like lecturing Brock Purdy.
Yeah, I heard
the title was like the 49ers are about to implode, like, because Brock Purdy was having none of it. And David, I'm gonna toss this your way because I know this is a nice little fantasy for you.
This is my wet dream, Lauren. Is that like you heard these little reports coming in from the beginning of the season where the ownership group in San Francisco, I'm gonna glitch again, aren't I? That the ownership group in San Francisco has been kind of disillusioned with John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. And there was that graphic I remember week 1 where it showed the payment structure of the 49ers as a team, and it was just like left tackle first, tight end first, middle linebacker first, and it was just one of the most expensive rosters, one of the most expensive. My biggest fantasy is I keep kind of fingers crossed watching this 49ers team collapse, and I want them to implode. I want the ownership group to get frustrated with Kyle Shanahan, and I think that regardless of how well Matt Eberfluh does, let's say Matt Eberfluh chugs out like 9 to 10 wins and takes you to the playoffs. If a guy like Kyle Shanahan's available, you write a blank check, you fire whoever's there, and that would be one of the great. I think the opportunity of the Bears is a great situation. I think probably one of the most appealing young jobs in the NFL if it was an available job. And yeah, that's my absolute. It's my fingers crossed, hoping for the downfall of the 49ers just so that we have an opportunity at Kyle Shanahan.
It's a big, big hope because this job won't be available. I mean, it's just probably won't.
That and San Francisco is not going to let him go after one. I mean, they were in the Super Bowl last year. 1 year later, it's going to take a couple of years of downfall for him. So it would take a couple of years of Eberfluh being disappointing. But I think I'm there. I think I'm there with you, Paul. That I don't think Eberfluh is getting fired. If they were going to fire Eberfluh, they would have done it last year. And I think now they've got him on. He's got a couple of years of a leash right now, unless things just do some kind of crazy implosion. And I don't think the 49ers are also having nearly enough of an implosion just yet. But, maybe the seeds of doubt have been planted there that this could be the beginning of the unraveling. But it's worth noting they still rank top 10 in offense and I think top 15 in defense. So they're not bottom of the NFL by any means just yet. And they're holding on by a thread.
I didn't listen to any of you guys say any of that. I didn't listen to either of you guys say any.
David's just in his fantasy world.
Just tuned out for about 3 minutes and just kind of what we're getting Kyle Shanahan next year?
Yeah, no.
The real pipe there, Dave, is that how about this? The 49ers fire Kyle Shanahan. And the Bears replace Shane Waldron with Kyle Shanahan. So Shanahan's just your offensive coordinator, and then you get the best of both worlds.
It's funny. This is part of David's dream. Is
Lauren.
that Eberfluh actually steps down to defensive coordinator,
Ah,
with Kyle Shanahan be the head coach. So it's part of that whole, insane little thing he's got going on. So it's nice though. It's cute. I like it. It gives me some long-term hope. But
that or Kevin Stefanski even honestly taking an OC job.
Yeah,
that would be
absolutely.
pretty sick.
Sign me up.
Yeah, that would be something I'd be definitely interested in. And I think that's a lot more realistic than the 49ers situation, especially with what they got going on in Cleveland. I mean, it's so bad. And
they're both equally realistic, Paul.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Both equally realistic.
I think kind of talking about the coaching though, and that's kind of been my biggest bugaboo with this team so far. And that combined with the idea of win now mode with this team, I think this year of the NFL, and we talked about like taking a step back and watching, is my God, does good coaching like just make so much of a difference early on and what that is. And we talk about like making splashes in free agency and making splashes in the draft and all that. I don't think, and I think this is my personal opinion, I probably need to watch the NFL for one more year to really solidify this opinion. I'm super sick of sitting on coaches, giving them more chances and hoping that they become better when you know a better option's out there. So when we talk about like, trading for a big piece or what are we doing with this or that, I think a good upgrade at a coaching staff here, especially in Chicago, because I don't think, and Paulie's posed this question before, we're probably the worst coaching staff in the NFC North at this point in the division that any one of these four teams is tops of the division anywhere else in the NFC. And so it's such a glaring weakness, I think, on this team that if you upgraded, let's just be more realistic because I am being silly with the pipe dream. It's just a fun fantasy. But like a guy like Kevin Stefanski is very much on the table being available. Even a guy like if Cincinnati implodes, a guy like Zach Taylor's coaching tree is not that good, but he does have, good offensive coordinator skills. Guys like from the Bengals or somebody, again, even, and we talk about these offensive coordinators, they do get some flash in the pan conversations. Guys like Kubiak or I forget the name from the guy with the Texans.
But David, I don't think you replace a coordinator without replacing a head coach this time around. I think you're tied to Shane Waldron.
I do agree with you in the theory and how you have been conditioned as a Bears fan. But I think in the sense of what that does to your increased wins, I think an elite offensive coordinator increases your wins by 1.5, maybe even 2 wins per season. And I think when you talk about like adding players and how much wins they, war, like if you're a baseball fan, Lauren, like wins above replacement, I think the glaring, just like throbbing issue with this team where you can add wins above replacement is coaching. And so I don't know how you feel about that in the sense of like the realism. Yes, I get where you guys are going with this, and that's not realistic to just dump Shane Waldron 1 year out. But if he's not doing something that is really obvious, if you do break 8-8 or 9-8 now or 8-9, I think that glaring upgrade can't be ignored anymore. The same way if you do have a good defensive end, but Micah Parsons wants to join your team, you're just going to say, well, hey, it's Micah. He's clearly better. We just got to upgrade. That's such an easier pill to swallow. And that's something that, again, watching the NFL this season, I think a lot of these teams made such terrible mistakes when you go down the line. Dallas should have gotten rid of Mike McCarthy. Las Vegas should not have kept Antonio Pierce. A lot of these teams that we're just going to give them one more chance, one more year, and we're not going to do this disrespectful firing. And I think it ends up biting you in the ass. And so I think the Bears shouldn't fall into that trap, but I haven't fully thought this theory through yet.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say about like coach development is that I always just want to like feel like I'm seeing signs of like, are they trying different things or are they just stubbornly stuck in trying to do the same thing the same way they've always done it over and over again? Because trust me, I'm the coach. I've been doing it this way for 20 years and it's worked for 20 years. So I'm going to keep doing it this way. And I at least give Eberfluh and Waldron credit for over the course of this season and in Eberfluh's case last season, breaking from their traditional tendencies that we've seen them be previously as coaches. Eberfluh has changed up a lot schematically. As coverage-wise, they're running a lot different now than they did when he first got to Chicago. They're blitzing more. That he has had the self-awareness to change things defensively that tell me he's a guy who can adapt and grow. And we've seen Shane Waldron. Well, it's not completely different from what he did in Seattle. Like, even just this season, they've changed their run scheme entirely. They've shifted how they're using personnel quite a bit. Gerald Everett never plays anymore after being a huge featured weapon in week 1. And it was concerning that they got so much wrong early on that they needed to adjust. But the fact that they've been willing to adjust it and not just stubbornly saying, this is what we're going to be, lets me give them some benefit of the doubt that maybe they will keep getting better as coaches. But if as soon as that stops, that's when the doubt and that's when I'm more on your board with you, where it's like, all right, this guy's not even trying to be different or better. Let's move on to something else.
And I agree with you as well, because the Eberfluh's shift, especially after Alan Williams left and he just saw what was working and what wasn't, and that was an incredibly quick switch. I think the one thing that me and Paul have noticed about the Bears, even under Ryan Poles' regime, they kind of do own their mistakes. Usually it's about 30% too late, right? Moving on from Claypool, moving on from Velus Jones, moving on from Matt Eberfluh, moving on from Luke Getsy.
But at least they do it. But at least they do it.
They do. But with a coaching change, the issue is you don't do these midseason. You never do them midseason. You can't get these guys midseason. You don't fire, let's say Stefanski gets fired next week with the Browns. You don't bring him in mid-year. No one's going to do that because it's just unrealistic. So these are wholesale changes that you always do have to make. So it's not quick upgrades. They're not that. They are long-term, thought-out changes that you have to make. And if you don't make them, you do have to sit on them for 16 months. You can't just bail on them. They are a 16-month wrong decision, as opposed to a player where you can cut them, replace them, start a new guy, and maybe there's a little bit of an upgrade there. And that's kind of my issue, is I don't want to see the traditional Bears thing where we hold on to guys because they're nice guys. And I've visualized the meeting with Matt Eberfluh as to why he was even given this team and this opportunity this year, is because, Matt, you were here through the dark days, and you did a good job for us through those. So we're going to give you've earned that opportunity to have a chance with a better roster and a better chance to win. And here's you get to pick another coordinator and this and that. Me and Paulie have always looked at the NFL incredibly cold. It's a business. It's a hardcore business. It's a cutthroat business. And if there is a upgrade to be made, you should, and you have the obligation to make it. And that's why, while Shane Waldron does look like he's making changes and they are relatively quick, I think we're just also desensitized to it with seeing Luke Getsy for two goddamn years and the changes that he was not able to make, or Matt Nagy and the bubble screen changes he was not able to make over 2 years. And we're just kind of conditioned to that. But yes, while he's done a decent job, what is this team's identity still? Do we have one? Do you feel good? Would you not feel significantly better with what the identity would be under a guy like Jim Harbaugh, under a guy like Kyle Shanahan? I know the moment that season starts what we're going to be good at and what we're not going to be good at before the games have even been played, because of who the coaches are. And in this case, I don't know if we're good week to week.
And just to piggyback off that a little bit, I think me and David have always kept in consideration that the worst spot to be is stuck in the middle. Right. And right now, the middle looks really good for us because we haven't been anywhere near it. So it's on one hand, you want to be happy from the success. On the other hand, like I said, you take a look at the landscape of the entire league and you know exactly what it takes to go out there and try and win one, especially from the NFC side. And I'll tell you right now, it's only been Matt Stafford that's done it recently. And he only did it because the Bengals knocked the Chiefs out. And so it's going to take a lot to go out there and get the job done all the way. And that includes the best coaches, great talent, and a damn good quarterback.
And I think they are willing to try and not be in the middle, right? Like, I think if they were happy with the just trying to hover in the middle, they would have kept Justin Fields, right? Like, I think the whole move to Caleb Williams was like, all right, we do have to aim higher. And I would have liked them to do the same thing at the coaching staff and aim higher at the front end of that too, instead of just keeping who they are. But I think that comes back to what every Chicago Bears conversation always eventually comes back to, but George McCaskey, Kevin Warren, and everyone at the top of the ownership. And then we could rehash that same thing that we've been talking about in this city for 25 years now. But that, those guys are involved in all these coaching decisions and stuff. And thankfully they're not as involved in the player decisions so that guys like Ryan Poles can make the big quarterback switch. Because I don't know if Kevin Warren and George McCaskey were picking quarterback here, they maybe would have still stuck with Justin Fields for all the same reasons they stuck with Matt Eberflus.
He was a nice guy and he fought through the bad times, so he gets a chance to do it with the good times. And that's kind of, but in the realistic sense of it too, is because I don't know, I'm not a Matt Nagy, geez, PTSD, Matt Eberflus hater by any means. I'm not a Shane Waldron hater, but it is just a fact of matter is, and we kept alluding to this at the beginning, we got to see these next 6 weeks to really, really know where this team stands and where the upgrades need to be made. But as of right now, we talked about it with me and Paulie that to win the Super Bowl, you need to win 3-4 games against the top tier, toughest teams that you can. And Matt Eberflus just won his 3rd game in a row in his career. I have very little confidence that guys in this division won't just absolutely take his lunch. Schematically, in terms of game plan, I don't know. We haven't seen Matt Eberflus compete with the best of them yet with a good team because this is his first chance. And so that's where I do see the advantage of keeping this team together, especially with how the defense ended. And now looking at the beginning of this season, without him here, this team probably does look a lot worse or takes a step back or step sideways defensively because that's what's keeping you afloat so far, even in the bad games for offensively. But I think within it's hard to say because if he goes 8-9 and the defense is still great, but the offense is still bad, I mean, where do you go from there? That is the definition of being stuck in the middle because the defense looks great. We don't want to get rid of this guy. Are we going to get him another offensive coordinator? Do you stick with Shane Waldron? Do you go wholesale change? It's a sloppy and important 6 weeks that we're going to be seeing and where we stand with that. But I think if there's a wholesale change to be upgraded, I need it to happen. I can't sit pat. I can't stand pat anymore as a Bears fan because I'm just so used to it.
But that's why it all boils down to these divisional games in front of us. And that's why it is so exciting at this moment now because they've had success up to this point. The growth has been there. They've done everything. I mean, they've done everything they need to keep their jobs as a coaching staff so far. But now you're going to get to see, do they have their big boy pants on? Can they really compete with the Lions and the Vikings and the Packers? I saw, I'm sure we've all heard it. There's been this little theory going around that all 4 NFC North teams might make the playoffs, which is insane. It's crazy how tough this division is. And it also sets up an opportunity for you to go out there and prove that you're not last in this division, that you can compete with these top teams, and that you are to be taken for real. And that's why, so like I said, I'm pumped for the next however many weeks.
Yeah, I think it'll be a good test for Eberflus to see if these coaches do take his lunch or not, because it did feel like last year Matt LaFleur was many steps ahead of the Bears schematically, but Eberflus was also seemed to be a step ahead of Ben Johnson in the Lions game. So we've got some evidence that he can out-scheme a good offensive coach and some evidence that he struggles to do so. And he gets another shot this year. And if you get your pants pulled down by both of them, then we have some real concerns here. But if you hang in tight and maybe you lose a couple of them, but they're all, 1, 2, 3-point games in there, and you feel like, all right, you weren't completely out-coached on both sides of the ball there, then maybe you got some real hope that things can come together here.
You guys,
I think remember the Bears going 3-3 this season in the division is going to be probably a pretty good result.
You guys remember seeing the image during the offseason of Eberflus and Matt LaFleur at the basketball game together? Mm-hmm. Matt LaFleur made him buy him the ticket, right? Like, you're paying. You're buying the popcorn too. He's taking his lunch for sure. So, Lauren, thank you so much, man. We're going on an hour 10. I don't want to keep you much longer here. Usually we do just about an hour. I don't know, David, if you have anything else you want to ask Lauren while he's still on with us, but it's been a great conversation so far.
One big one, just game prediction and, walk us through your thoughts on Washington. And let's say it's with Jaden Daniels. How do you expect this team has been flowing, and what do you expect to see against Washington, if you care to share that yet?
Yeah, I think either way, whether it's Jaden or Marcus Mariota, I still think the Bears are going to win that game because I think Eberflus can stay a step ahead of Cliff Kingsbury's scheme. And I think this will be the best defense that Jaden Daniels and company have played all season, and that Cliff Kingsbury has this very solid history of starting hot and then falling off completely. The 3 years with the Cardinals and plenty of years with the Texas Tech before that. They'll start the season 5-0, they'll start the season 4-2 or whatever, and then they'll finish the season 0-5 or finish the season 1-5 or 0-4, whatever it is. The Cliff Kingsbury teams always start hot. They're a step ahead of everybody. Everybody adjusts to them, and then they completely fall off because they're not able to make that adjustment to the adjustment. And so I just wonder if the Bears are the beginning of this stretch for Washington where they need to make an adjustment and they're not able to do so because they got the Bears, the Giants, and the Steelers in the next 3 games to 3 fairly decent defenses to great defenses, depending on the spectrum there. So I think the Bears will be able to keep things in front of them with the Washington offense. And then I don't think Washington's defense is all that great. So I don't think it's going to be like an easy win or like a blowout or anything right there. But I think it's a good stepping stone game for the Bears. And I think they'll get a few touchdowns. They'll hold Washington under 20. They'll score over 20. And, it'll be another one of these 24-20 or 21-17 or something along those lines where the Bears win. They handle their business, but it's not like a super, super easy game, but they kind of send a little message here of like, hey, you guys aren't so tough or aren't so special just yet.
I love the analysis. I agree. I agree pretty much wholeheartedly. So I'm with you there, like 27-21, 24-27 or something.
Yeah, I have to agree as well. So, man, that's why we love to have you on. So thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you for everybody in chat that has been participating and watching. And this next week cannot get here fast enough. So, thanks so much, everybody. Have a good night and bear down.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Lauren. And once again, everybody, Locked On Bears. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out for sure.
Yep.